September 16, 1944. Eastern France. The Moselle River Valley lies silent under a gray pre-dawn sky, fog clinging to the water like a shroud. In 6 hours, the Third Army will push 3 divisions across this region, racing toward the German border before winter locks the front in place. But right now, at 0430 hours, the only thing standing between Allied supply lines and the German armor counterthrust is a single stone bridge over a tributary creek, and one man who was never supposed to be there. His name is Corporal James Hendricks, 23 years old, from a town in Nebraska, so small it doesn't appear on most maps. He's a combat engineer, trained to build things, not defend them. But in the next 8 hours, he will do something that military historians would later call tactically impossible. He will hold a critical choke point against an entire enemy mechanized column, using nothing but improvised traps, calculated deception, and a willingness to die alone rather than let the line collapse. This is not a story about heroism in the traditional sense. It's a story about a man who understood geometry better than glory, who turned a medieval stone bridge into a killing ground so effective that German officers would later refuse to believe it was defended by a single soldier. No medals were ever awarded. No official reports credited his name. But the Third Army crossed the Moselle on schedule, and the German counteroffensive that could have pushed the Allies back to the Meuse never materialized, because one forgotten engineer refused to retreat. James Hendricks grew up fixing farm equipment in the Sandhills in Nebraska, where the nearest neighbor was 4 miles away, and problem-solving meant making do with whatever you had. His father ran a cattle ranch that barely broke even, and by the time James was 12, he could rebuild a tractor engine, jury-rig irrigation systems from scrap metal, and calculate load-bearing stress in his head while replacing fence posts. He was an academic, didn't care much for books unless they had diagrams, but he understood how things work with an intuitive precision that unnerved his teachers. When the war came, he enlisted in the Army Corps of Engineers, not because he wanted to fight, but because he wanted to build bridges and roads, things that mattered, things that lasted. They sent him to Fort Belvoir for training, where he learned demolition math, bridge construction, minefield patterns, and the peculiar algebra of defensive positions. He excelled at the technical parts, struggled with military discipline. His instructors noted he had a habit of ignoring doctrine when he saw a better solution, which made him both brilliant and insubordinate in equal measure. By June of 1944, he was in France, attached to the 7th Combat Engineer Battalion, building pontoon bridges under artillery fire and clearing German minefields with a speed that kept the armor moving forward. On the night of September 15th, his unit receives orders to prepare a secondary supply bridge for demolition. The main crossings are further south, but this smaller stone bridge, built sometime in the 14th century and reinforced with steel during the last war, serves as a fallback route if the primary spans are destroyed. Standard procedure: wire it with explosives, post a guard, blow it if the Germans approach. Simple. Routine. Hendricks volunteers for the guard duty because the rest of his squad is exhausted from 3 days of continuous operations, and he figures a quiet night watching an empty bridge beats digging foxholes in the mud. His sergeant hands him a radio, 2 crates of ammunition, a satchel charge detonator, and a thermos of coffee that tastes like diesel fuel. The bridge is 2 miles behind the forward line, deep enough in Allied territory that no one expects trouble. Hendricks sets up his position on the eastern bank, in the shadow of an old stone mill that gives him a clear view of the road approaching from the German side. The bridge itself is narrow, maybe 20 feet wide, with low stone parapets and a single arch spanning 40 feet of slow-moving water. If the Germans want to use it, they'll have to come straight at him. No room to maneuver, no way to flank. He smokes a cigarette, checks the demo charges wired under the arch, and settles in for what he assumes will be a boring night. At 0415, the radio crackles. A frantic voice, broken by static, reports German armor breaking to the northern flank. Panzers and mechanized infantry, at least a battalion, pushing hard toward the supply roads. The main Allied units are repositioning, but there's a gap, a window of maybe 6 hours before reinforcements can plug the line. If the Germans reach the bridges, they can cut off the entire Third Army salient, trap 2 divisions, turn the offensive into a catastrophe. Hendricks tries to raise his command post, gets nothing but static. He tries again, adjusting frequencies, and finally gets through to a hairy lieutenant who tells him to blow the bridge immediately and fall back. Standard doctrine. Deny the enemy the crossing, retreat to friendly lines, live to fight another day. Hendricks looks at the bridge, at the demolition charges, at the road vanishing into the fog. He does the math in his head. If he blows it now, the Germans will ford the creek or bring up engineering equipment, and they'll only be delayed an hour, maybe two. But if he holds the bridge, if he makes them think it's defended by a platoon instead of one man, he can buy 6 hours, maybe 8. Enough time for the reinforcements to arrive, for the line to stabilize. It's a stupid idea, a suicidal idea, but it's also the only idea that might actually work. He makes a decision in under 30 seconds. He's not blowing the bridge. He's defending it, alone, against a German mechanized column that will arrive at dawn. He has no illusions about surviving this, but he has a very clear idea about how to make the Germans pay for every foot of that bridge. Hendricks grabs his rifle, his ammunition, and starts moving. The mill gives him a firing position with elevation and cover, but it's too obvious. The first place the Germans will suppress with tank fire. Instead, he crosses to the western bank and starts setting up what he will later call his carousel, a series of improvised fighting positions spaced around the bridge approach, each one offering a different angle of fire, each one designed to make the enemy think they're facing multiple defenders. He uses rubble from a collapsed barn to build a sniper nest with a clear view of the bridge deck. He drags an abandoned cart into a ditch and piles stones behind it for a low firing point that can engage vehicles at the waterline. He finds a cellar entrance in the mill foundation and sets up a third position that covers the road from below grade. Each position has ammunition, a clear escape route, and a sight line that overlaps with the others just enough to create crossfire. The trick isn't to fight from one spot. It's to move constantly, to fire from one position, sprint to another, fire again, make the enemy think there's a squad, a platoon, a company defending this bridge. Deception through geometry. By 0530, the sky is turning pale gray, and Hendricks hears a sound every infantryman dreads, the grinding roar of tank engines echoing through the valley. He moves to the sniper nest, settles into a prone position behind the rubble, and waits. The fog is thick, reducing visibility to maybe 100 yards, but he can track the Germans by sound. They're moving cautiously, scouts ahead, probably expecting the bridge to be blown already. Hendricks counts the seconds, controlling his breathing, forcing his heart rate down. At 0550, the first German scout car emerges from the fog, an SD KFZ 222 armored car with a 20mm autocannon, moving slowly, turret swiveling. Behind it, the shapes of half-tracks and infantry. Hendricks doesn't fire. Not yet. He lets the scout car roll onto the bridge, lets it reach the midpoint, and then he squeezes a trigger. The shot cracks across the water, and the driver slumps forward. The car veers left, clips the parapet, and grinds to a halt, blocking half the bridge. Hendricks doesn't wait to see the result. He's already moving, sprinting along his pre-planned route to the second position in the ditch. He drops into cover, levels his rifle, and fires 3 rapid shots at the infantry dismounting from the half-tracks. 2 men drop. The rest scatter, taking cover, returning fire at the sniper nest he just abandoned. Perfect. The Germans are disciplined, well-trained, and they react exactly as Hendricks expects. They suppress the sniper nest with machine gun fire, pour rounds into the rubble until nothing could possibly be alive in there, and then send a squad forward to clear it. Hendricks watches from the ditch, counts the soldiers, and waits until they're bunched up near the mill entrance. Then he fires again for quick shots, dropping the lead man and sending the others diving for cover. Now they think there are at least 2 shooters, one in the nest, one in the ditch. They call up a half-track, use it as mobile cover, and start advancing on both positions simultaneously. Hendricks is already gone, moving to his third position in the cellar entrance, where he has a low angle on the bridge deck. He fires at the half-track's tires, doesn't penetrate the armor but forces it to stop, and then he puts 2 rounds into the exposed infantry using it for cover. The Germans go to ground again, confused, taking fire from 3 directions, unable to pinpoint his location. An officer is shouting orders. try and organize a coordinated assault. But every time they move, Hendricks is somewhere else, firing and displacing, a ghost who won't stay still long enough to kill. By 0630, the German column has been stalled for over 40 minutes, and their commander is getting frustrated. Hendricks can hear him on a radio, barking orders, demanding to know how many Americans are defending the bridge. The answer comes back uncertain. Maybe a platoon, maybe more. Hard to tell with the fog and the crossfire. The commander orders up armor. 2 Panzer IV tanks that grind forward, turrets traversing, looking for targets. Hendricks knows he can't stop tanks with rifle fire, but he doesn't need to stop them. He just needs to delay them. He waits until the first tank is halfway across the bridge, and then he triggers the demolition charge under the western arch. Not the whole bridge. Just one of 3 charges he set, enough to collapse a section of the road surface and drop the front half of the tank into a crater. The Panzer lurches, track spinning, unable to advance or reverse, blocking the bridge completely. The second tank tries to push it forward, and Hendricks fires at the exposed infantry around them, forcing everyone back into cover. The Germans are stuck now, unable to cross, unable to go around, taking casualties every time they try to organize. They bring up mortars, start dropping shells around the suspected firing positions, but Hendricks is already moving, circling behind them, using the fog and the terrain to stay invisible. At 0700 hours, the German commander makes a decision. If they can't force the bridge, they'll bypass it. He splits his column, sends half his force south to find another crossing, and commits the rest to clearing the bridge no matter the cost. Hendricks sees the movement, realizes he's bought almost 3 hours, but the fight is about to get much worse. The Germans are bringing up flamethrowers and engineers, preparing to burn out every suspected position and clear the rubble meter by meter. Hendricks falls back to his original position in the mill, checks his ammunition, and realizes he's down to less than 60 rounds. Not enough for a sustained firefight. He needs to change tactics. Instead of shooting, he starts using the environment. He rigs a tripwire across the approach road, connects it to a stack of fuel cans he found in the mill cellar, and waits. When the German engineers advance, the lead man trips the wire, and the fuel ignites in a roaring fireball that engulfs the bridge entrance. Men scream, falling back, and in the chaos, Hendricks fires into the smoke, dropping 2 more before retreating again. The Germans are convinced now that they're facing a dug-in platoon with prepared defenses, and they respond accordingly, calling in artillery support to pound the area before making another assault. The artillery arrives at 0730, and for the next 20 minutes, Hendricks crouches in the cellar while shells scream overhead, blasting the mill to rubble, cratering the road, churning the earth into a moonscape. He's deafened, bleeding from shrapnel cuts, covered in dust, but he's alive, and more importantly, he's still holding the bridge. When the barrage lifts, the Germans advance again, infantry and armor together, moving fast to exploit the bombardment. Hendricks emerges from the cellar, sees the half-tracks rolling forward, and makes another split-second decision. He sprints to the bridge, pulls the pin on his last grenade, and rolls it under the lead vehicle. The explosion rips through the undercarriage, and the half-track slews sideways, burning. The infantry behind it scatters, and Hendricks fires his last magazine, 8 rounds, each one finding a target. Before his rifle clicks empty, he drops it, pulls his pistol, and falls back to the western bank, using the burning wreckage as cover. The Germans are closing now, maybe 30 meters away, and he knows this is the end. But then he hears something that makes his heart leap. The high-pitched whine of American tank engines. The reinforcements are here. 3 Sherman tanks crest the hill behind him, followed by infantry carriers and jeeps, and the German column breaks, retreating in disarray as the Americans pour fire into their flank. Hendricks collapses against a stone wall, breathing hard, watching the Shermans roll past him toward the bridge. An American captain jumps down, stares at him, and demands to know where the rest of his unit is. Hendricks shakes his head, says there's no unit, it's just him. The captain doesn't believe it first, looks around for other soldiers, for evidence of a defensive perimeter. But there's no one, just 1 man, 1 rifle, and a bridge still standing. The captain radios back to command, reports the bridge is secure, enemy repelled, casualties light. No mention of how it was held, or by whom. Just another line in a daily intelligence summary. Hendricks sits there, shaking, bleeding, and utterly forgotten. The German column that Hendricks delayed never made it to the main supply roads. Stalled for 8 hours at the bridge. They were caught by American air strikes and artillery as they tried to regroup, and the entire counteroffensive collapsed before it really began. Third Army crossed the Moselle on schedule, advanced 50 kilometers in 3 days, and by the end of September, the Allies were within striking distance of the German border. None of the after-action reports mentioned a single engineer holding a bridge for 8 hours. The official record credited the defense elements of the 7th Combat Engineer Battalion, implying a unit action rather than an individual one. Hendricks himself never talked about it, never filed a report, never sought recognition. He returned to his squad, went back to building bridges and clearing mines, and finished the war without a scratch on his service record beyond a standard commendation for meritorious service. His sergeant knew what happened, pieced it together from radio logs and German prisoner interrogations, but by then the story had already been forgotten in the chaos of the advance. After the war, Hendricks went home to Nebraska, took over his father's failing ranch, and spent the next 40 years raising cattle and fixing tractors. He died in 1989, and his obituary mentioned his service in the Corps of Engineers, but nothing about the bridge, because no one knew, no one remembered, but the German officers who survived that day never forgot. In post-war interviews, they described the bridge defense as one of the most effective delaying actions they encountered in the entire campaign, crediting it to a platoon-strength force with prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire, and a commander who understood terrain better than any American they'd faced. When researchers later cross-referenced the accounts with Allied records and realized it had been one man, they initially dismissed it as impossible. No single soldier could create that level of defensive effectiveness. But the evidence was undeniable. Radio logs confirmed only one American was assigned to the bridge. Ammunition counts matched what one man could carry, and the pattern of fire, the movement between positions, the timing of the demolition, all pointed to a single defender who understood that warfare isn't about firepower. It's about perception. Hendricks had fought a psychological battle, making the Germans believe they faced overwhelming resistance, when in reality, they faced one stubborn engineer who refused to quit. The tactical genius of what Hendricks did lies in understanding a principle that military doctrine often overlooks. The enemy can only react to what they perceive, not what actually exists. By creating multiple firing positions and moving constantly, he manufactured the illusion of a larger force. By using demolitions and environmental triggers, he forced the Germans to assume they were facing prepared defenses rather than improvisation. And by choosing his targets carefully, hitting officers and vehicle commanders, he created chaos in the German command structure, slowing their decision-making and buying precious time. Every choice he made was calculated to maximize delay rather than infliction of casualties. He didn't need to destroy the German column. He just needed to make them hesitate, to second-guess, to waste time organizing assaults against an enemy that kept slipping away. It was, in essence, a masterclass in defensive economy of force, the art of doing the maximum with the minimum, of turning weakness into strength through intelligent application of terrain and tactics. Modern military analysts who study the engagement often use it as a teaching example in asymmetric warfare courses, though few students realize they're learning from the actions of a forgotten corporal who never attended a military academy. The principles Hendricks applied intuitively, the use of multiple positions to simulate larger numbers, the exploitation of terrain to channel enemy movement, the psychological impact of unpredictable fire, these are now codified in doctrines for small unit defensive operations. Special Forces units trained to do exactly what Hendricks did that morning, though they usually have more resources, more support, and more recognition when it's over. What makes his story remarkable isn't just that he held the bridge, it's that he did it without training for it, without orders directing it, without any expectation of survival or reward. He saw a problem, calculated a solution, and executed it with the same practical precision he used to fix tractors back in Nebraska. No drama, no heroics in the Hollywood sense, just a job that needed doing, and a man who refused to walk away. There's a broader truth in Hendricks' story that resonates beyond military history. It's about the forgotten people who hold the line when no one is watching, who make the critical decisions in the moments when leadership is absent, who keep systems running not because they'll be praised, but because the alternative is collapse. Every complex operation, whether a military campaign or a supply chain or an emergency response, depends on individuals like Hendricks, people who see what needs to be done and do it, even when it's dangerous, even when it's thankless, even when no one will ever know. The bridge held not because of grand strategy or overwhelming force, but because one man with a rifle and a stubborn streak decided that retreat wasn't an option. That's not the kind of heroism that gets movies made or monuments built, but it's the kind that actually changes outcomes, that turns potential disasters into footnotes, that keeps history moving forward instead of sliding backward. In the decades after the war, military historians occasionally stumbled across references to the bridge action, usually in German accounts that describe an unusually effective American defensive position. A few tried to track down details, but the paperwork was lost, the witnesses were dead, and the story faded into obscurity. It wasn't until the 1990s, when researchers doing oral histories with surviving veterans, that someone finally connected the dots. A former sergeant mentioned a corporal who'd held a bridge alone, and another veteran confirmed it, and slowly the pieces came together. By then, Hendricks was dead. His family had no idea he'd done anything unusual, and there was no one left to award or acknowledge. The Army Historical Center added a footnote to their records, correcting the attribution, but changed nothing practically. Just another small correction in the vast archives of the Second World War. The bridge still stands today, though it's been reinforced and widened to handle modern traffic. There's no plaque, no marker, nothing to indicate that it was the site of one of the most effective single-soldier defensive actions of the war. Tourists drive across it on their way to wineries in the Moselle Valley, unaware that the stone beneath their tires was held by a man who understood that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody sees. Local historians know the story now, thanks to a few dedicated researchers who kept digging, but it remains largely unknown outside academic circles. It doesn't fit the narrative we prefer for war stories. No dramatic last stands, no martyrdom, no convenient moral lesson. Just a man doing a job, surviving, and going home to live a quiet life that bore no resemblance to the 8 hours when he rewrote the rules of defensive warfare. What Hendricks proved that day is that tactical doctrine exists to guide decisions, not dictate them, and that the most effective soldiers are often the ones who know when to ignore the rules. Standard procedure said blow the bridge and retreat. Hendricks saw a better option and took it, understanding that survival isn't always the highest priority when the alternative is mission failure. He gambled his life on a plan that had no right to work, and it succeeded because he executed it with a level of precision and adaptability that transformed improvisation into art. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense, didn't charge into gunfire or sacrifice himself dramatically. He was something more valuable, a problem solver who stayed calm under pressure, who turned limitations into advantages, who understood that winning isn't about having more resources than the enemy. It's about using what you have more intelligently. The lesson from Hendricks' forgotten stand isn't that individuals can defeat armies. It's that intelligent defense, properly executed, can multiply effectiveness far beyond raw numbers. One man with knowledge of terrain, understanding of enemy psychology, and willingness to take calculated risks held off a mechanized column for 8 hours, buying time for reinforcements and preventing a breakthrough that could have altered the entire campaign. He didn't do it through superhuman courage or impossible feats of marksmanship. He did it through geometry, timing, and the simple refusal to accept that being outnumbered meant being defeated. That's a lesson that applies far beyond military tactics. In any situation where resources are limited and stakes are high, intelligent application of what you have beats wishful thinking about what you don't have. Hendricks never saw himself as exceptional. In the few conversations he had with fellow veterans in later years, he described the bridge action as just doing what made sense at the time, nothing more complicated than that. He didn't agonize over the decision to stay, didn't see it as heroic, just practical. The bridge needed holding. He had the skills to hold it, so he held it. The fact that he survived was bonus, not expectation. That mindset, that almost prosaic acceptance of danger as simply another problem to be solved, is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the story. It suggests a kind of courage that doesn't announce itself, doesn't need validation, doesn't require an audience. It's a courage of the competent, of people who trust their skills enough to bet their lives on them, who understand that fear is just data to be processed, not an excuse to quit. The irony is that Hendricks' greatest contribution to military tactics came from his refusal to follow them. By ignoring doctrine and improvising his own defense, he demonstrated principles that would later be incorporated into formal training. Modern defenders in asymmetric situations, from Iraq to Afghanistan, use variations of his tactics, multiple positions, constant movement, psychological warfare through unpredictable fire. The difference is they learned it from manuals. He invented it on the spot because he didn't have time to consult a manual. That kind of adaptive thinking, the ability to assess a situation and create solutions in real time without templates or guidance, is what separates adequate soldiers from exceptional ones. Hendricks was exceptional precisely because he didn't think of himself that way. He just solved problems, and one of those problems happened to be holding a bridge against a German armor column. In the end, the story of Corporal James Hendricks and the Forgotten Bridge is a reminder that history is full of invisible pivots, moments when everything could have gone differently if one person had made a different choice. If Hendricks had followed orders and blown the bridge, the German column might have crossed, the Third Army might have been cut off, the war might have lasted months longer. But he didn't follow orders. He followed logic, and the line held. No one remembers it officially. No monuments mark the spot. No historians debate its significance in grand narratives of the war. It's just a footnote, a correction, an archive, a story told by researchers to specialized audiences. But for the soldiers who crossed the Moselle on schedule, for the divisions that advanced instead of retreating, for the civilians who were liberated months earlier because the German counteroffensive failed, Hendricks' decision to stay at that bridge mattered absolutely. He held the line when it counted, and then he went home and fixed tractors. That's the real heroism, the kind that doesn't need recognition, because it's not done for recognition. It's done because someone has to do it. And sometimes that someone is just one stubborn man with a rifle and a bridge he refuses to give up.